Morning, everyone. How we doing today? Matt, I'm kind of in a low energy Monday from today. I cannot explain it. I just really want another fall break. Actually, I want like 4 fall breaks in a row. It's kind of where I'm at. I'm very much ready for Thanksgiving. It's not anything like the classes. I'm still enjoying my classes. Just the energy levels are just really, really low. I think it's the weather. I can't explain it. I was teaching my graduate class today, and they were just kind of saying, "What's wrong, Dr. Barnes?" I said, "I wish I knew. Maybe it's just being old." But we got some interesting stuff to talk about today. We're going to be doing some Power BI work, so this is going to be a little bit different than a normal lecture. We're actually going to be doing some interactive work. So if you're not logged into your computer, I recommend that you get logged on. If you're using your laptop, you want to make sure your laptop has got Power BI installed or that you're connected to a remote desktop. Also, you might want to do this now rather than later, simply because it may take a little while. So in case you didn't know, there's a global outage of Amazon Web Services, and I think it's actually affecting Brightspace because it's moving really, really slow. So you'll want to go to week 10 and download this file called Data Analytics Demo Original. And this is the file we're going to be working with for an example today. I would also encourage you to make sure you have the slides downloaded, just because I'm going to be working through this, but the details are in the slides, so that you'll have those to refer back to if in case you miss something. It's going to take a minute for me to log in because, as weird as this sounds, there's Power BI on all the computers in this room except for one, and guess which one it is? It's on this one right here. So I've got to log into the remote desktop to use Power BI. There are some minor differences, but we'll be able to work through those. All right, so let's go ahead and let's do the lecture part, and then we'll get to the fun part. So we talked about it in chapter 2. We talked about the AMPS model. So remember, AMPS model has 4 parts: ask the question, master the data, perform the analysis, and share the story. And we've done the first 3 parts. We've talked about how we ask the question, how we actually master the data, which, remember, master the data is this idea of extract, transform, and load, data cleaning and validation. Then performing analysis, we did some examples of that on Friday. And today we're going to talk about what it means to share the story. Now, there's a lot of different ways that we could share information, and I've seen all different routines. I do think that sharing stories in as simple detail as possible, trying to convey simple stories, simple pieces of information, is the most effective means. And so I don't know what the routine is for the 221 classes right now, but when I taught 221, one of the things that I did is I had my students work in groups to prepare a financial analysis of a company. So has anybody done a project like that, done a publicly traded company financial analysis? So I have very, very specific requests for when students do presentations. And one of my requests is that you keep the information that you present in slides to very minimal detail. And that's simply because your audience is not going to be able to absorb large pieces of information. Most of my groups were very, very good at that. They took it to heart, and they said, all right, I'm going to identify the most relevant financial ratios, and those are all I'm going to talk about. But I get a few occasional groups that would be like, I'm going to present the entire set of financial statements just on one slide so the Dr. Barnes could see I did the work. And I'm like, kudos, but I don't know what's going on in your financial statements. And then they would present every single financial ratio that was possibly present. And all that would go on one slide. And I have to go back and explain to them, that is too much information for me to absorb. I only want the relevant details. So why is that? Why are we talking about this? And part of this has to do with this concept of information overload, which, as Truman students, I'm sure you're very, very acquainted with. Do you ever just kind of feel like that, you encountered so much information in a day that you're just like, I can't absorb anything more. The capacity is full. We're at the level we're at right now, and nothing more is going to come into it. So that is a very relevant concern, especially in this day and age, because there is so much information out there. But the other component has to do with the fact with how we absorb information, is that human beings, by their very nature, are visual learners, which means that me talking and telling stories up here or putting stuff into slides is not going to be as it's going to be something that you can grasp onto, but it's not going to be as effective as providing images, because most people operate visually. So some statistics on this, okay? Why do we use visualizations? Data visualization is kind of what we're going to be talking about here. It's 91% of people per visual content over written content. And I think that probably is going to be much higher for this room than 91%, because the content that we're trying to absorb is much more complex in nature. Now, Statistically speaking, if we're talking about studies, Facebook photos have an interaction rate of 87% compared to 4% for less other types of posts. Now, if you think about it, and it's not just on Facebook, but on social media, like I was joking about this last week. I think it was in this class to say I'm on Facebook, but a lot of people are not on Facebook. But most people I would in this room, I would bet are Instagram. A lot of people are Instagram. Why is that the case? Because it's very easy to share a story through a picture, and Instagram operates very heavily through images. So that's a very, very compelling support for this idea of imagery support. Also, the brain processes images 60,000 times faster than it processes text. Now, if you think about this, how would you like to learn information? How would you like to learn information? Like somebody show you in front of you and should process it step by step, hopefully with compelling visual images, or would you rather sit down and read a textbook for an hour and just try to muddle through what the details are? I will tell you right now, I am not a good textbook reader. I don't encourage anybody to learn solely through textbook reading. If you're one of those people who can do that, kudos to you, because that's a very hard skill to master. It's a very difficult skill to master. So that's why I tend to operate very heavily through images and why I try not to overwhelm my students with information and text. It's also because I enjoy memes. I like tossing memes into my presentations. I make the joke that I teach through memes, but there is actually some relevant foundation for that, is that if you provide images, those are going to be more compelling to your audience than just providing text. Yeah, and so a lot of our information that's transferred to the brain is going to be visual. So let's go ahead and see if we can find ways to convey information, convey data that's going to be from visual context. So we're going to talk about two categories of data visualization. And so the first of these is going to be called exploratory data visualizations. And these are what we use for traditional data analysis. So this is going to be highly relevant to the perform the analysis stage. Now, I do not think visualizations are the most effective method of a data analysis, but they are a method of data analysis. They can reveal patterns in the data, which can lead to greater insight in exploratory data analysis. So remember last week when I was talking about this thing called Benford analysis? Does anybody remember that discussion? I was talking about how digits that are in naturally occurring data have a downward sloping trend. That's an example of an exploratory data analysis. If you know what the graph is supposed to look like and you can look at the graph and see deviations, you can say, this is an outlier, this is something I want to investigate. That might be an example of a good exploratory analysis. On the other hand, what we're going to focus on today are going to be explanatory data visualizations, which are good for communicating the findings of data analysis to stakeholders. This is going to be our share of the story component. So you identify what the issues are. How do you actually convey this information to? How do you convey this detail to the people that need to know this or need to know this detail? And the answer is that you could write a report and hopefully somebody would read it, or they could say, explain it to me in the simplest terms possible. And you say, here's a picture that explains this whole story. Now, we're going to scratch the surface on this. I've already said this before. I am not a super user of Power BI. I know the basics of it. And many of you may actually know more about how to use tools like this. Maybe we're going to cover the very basic foundations, but it will cover some of these data visualizations that I think are very critical. What's important for this chapter, as far as the context in the exam, there will be 2 multiple choice questions on the exam, by the way, from this chapter. And a lot of it is going to be based on what we're going to talk about next. Is what kind of visualizations are used for certain types of data analysis. So yeah, let's go ahead and go into the types of data visualizations. And so what is going to be the first type of visualization we're talking about? It's going to be bar charts. So we've actually looked at bar charts before. Bar charts are kind of a default in Excel. Those are the ones that most people use when they're looking because it's the first one listed. And so vertical or horizontal bar charts present categorical information. So whenever we have detail that's assorted into categories, bar charts are useful for actually depicting the different categorizations of that. So we think about this as an easy way to think about it. If we're talking about geographic regions, then we could say, let's go ahead and look at this according to the categories that the regions represent. Now, this is a bit of a misnomer because we're going to also talk about geospatial data in just a bit, and there's some overlap here. But we can look at geospatial data in a couple of ways. We can look at it geographically, or we can look at it categorically. And we can say identify just saying north, south, east, and west represent different categories in the same continent or the same area for that matter. So that would be an easy way to think about visualization. So again, bar charts are good for conveying categorical data. Then we have histograms, which looks a lot like a bar chart, but it tends to be an operational bar chart that uses ordinal distribution. So ordinal is basically saying that there's some sort of relevance to the numbers that are assigned to it. And you can kind of see that we see the valuation that's kind of listed here on the graph. It actually shows the distribution of a single variable across a range of values. So this is a univariate analysis. And you can kind of see, we look at here, we've got our dependent variable, which is going to be our return on asset values and the percentage of firms. And basically, we're trying to determine what is happening on the return on assets value when we talk about a univariate distribution. So what is going to be listed for return on assets value, and how many percentage of firms are getting a higher returns on assets, depending on that. I think I said dependent variable. That's a misnomer. I shouldn't say that because there's only one variable, so it's just a variable. It's not dependent on anything. But a single variable, univariate on across a range of values, we're looking at seeing what the distribution is of those particular variables. So in this particular case, that variable is just going to be return on assets for a group of firms. All right. What happens if we have multivariate analysis, though? This is when we do get dependent variables. So if we're talking about multivariate analysis, a good form of visualization is going to be a scatter plot diagram. So this is basically just showing the kind of the correlation between two continuous variables. And you've probably heard this term before. You've heard the term dependent variable, independent variable. An independent variable operates independently of our assumptions, and then the dependent variable is basically saying what happens when the independent variable has this value. What happens to the dependent variable? So say, for example, we've got a value of 0.5 on the y-axis. That results in a value of 0.6 on the y-axis. So it would have been much more compelling if they give some examples of what this means. But like say, example of, so easy example would be age correlated to the number of classes you've taken in Truman. Presumably there's going to be a correlation there. So if I look at whatever the age is over here, which is an independent metric, that doesn't have any, I have no impact on that whatsoever. Everybody's got their own age that they're associated with. When you have the age listed here, what is going to be the value here? And so that's going to be an example of how we can actually look at multivariate analysis, see what is the change when we actually look at different values for independent variables. Then I think again I'm messing this up again. This is my low energy today. So I said this is the independent variable and this is dependent variable. I completely transposed those. This is dependent. This is independent. So this would be where we would list the age, and this is where we would be listing the number of classes. So obviously, if I'm messing that up, I'm not going to test any of that too closely. But I do expect you to remember that we're talking about scatter plots. We're going to be using those for multivariate analysis. That's the key important point. So my apologies there. A little bit off my game today. All right, so I mentioned earlier, what about geospatial analysis? What would be an easy way to present geospatial data? The answer is maps, okay? So map and symbol maps can actually present what the distribution of data looks like. This is actually something that's kind of consistent with modern analysis tools, modern visualization tools. This is something that was not available until the past couple of decades. But if we know that we want to look and see what the information looks like, then we can look at according to a map, according to how geographic distribution. This is really popular when we talk about political analysis. We tend to look at what is the distribution of voters in a particular category in a particular area. You can probably, if you've ever followed politics on an election night, you probably see different colors that are showing up on a map that's showing how dense the distribution of certain types of voters are in a particular area. It's very interesting to watch because you tend to see, if you talk about the traditional red-blue maps, you tend to see a lot of red on the coast and then a lot of blue right around here. Or sorry, the other way around, blue on the coast and the red right around here. So yeah, I think I got that one right. Did I get that one right, or I transposed that again? I'm just transposing it like a madman today. So yeah. Anyway, it's a good example of geospatial distribution. Yeah. Then we have something that's a little bit more familiar. We have time trend analysis. So this is basically where we're going to be using line charts. Now, a lot of people think that line charts and bar charts are interchangeable, and I don't think that's the case. We can use them interchangeably, but that doesn't mean they should be used interchangeably. Generally speaking, when we talk about time trends, we want to actually default to the line charts because we want to see what is the variation in trends over time. And that's going to be a little bit more effective, a little bit more compelling than trying to use it when we would use a bar chart. So has anybody ever done trend analysis for their financial analysis in other courses? That's a pretty compelling example. This is something we talk about in other courses, but we say, what does gross profit look like in 2020? What does it look like in 2021, 2022, 2023? If we plot that along a graph and we see what the changes are and see what the deviations are, we can see if there's anything that falls way outside of expectation. So imagine you have a gross profit percentage of 20% for every year up until the current year, and it drops down to 15%. What is going to be your reaction? Well, if you're an investor, you're going to be like, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. But more rational person would say, I'd want to know the reason for that. And that would be a very easy way to depict that. Then we have our final visualization tool, which is going to be a pie or a donut chart. And this is going to be showing proportional shares at a total single point in time. So if you think about a pie chart example, it's trying to depict 100% of a population and showing what the distribution is of that 100%. So this could be very similar to how we view other tools, but this is a kind of default whenever we're looking for at the whole distribution of a particular population of information. So if I had to say, okay, how many students in the class are sophomores, how many are juniors, how many are seniors, I'm looking at the entire class, but I'm depicting them according to categories, looking at 100% of all categories, or all the sum of all categories. So pie and donut charts would be really good for proportional share. We can actually see both the ranges because they're usually listed by percentage, but also the visual depiction of how much of the pie they take up. Okay. I would assume in this class, if I were to look at it, there'd be a minimal amount of sophomores in this class, maybe a few, because it's very hard to get in the class of sophomores, a very large amount of juniors, and then probably a slightly smaller but still reasonable amount of seniors in the class. And we kind of see three categories that are listed here. There may not even be any categorical sophomores. It may just be juniors and seniors in this class. So it'd be an easy way to depict the proportional shares. So that's it. That's basically all you need to know for the multiple choice multiple choice portion. That's what happens when you try to say portion and part at the same time. You get port. Tried to say multiple choice part. The multiple choice part of the exam. You will need to know this detail and understand what are the different types of analysis we can do. I did summarize this in a little bit of a table for you, so you can actually look at the type of data, the types of charts that are being used, and some examples of those. So I would highly recommend, as you're studying for the exam in a few weeks, that you take a look at this and make sure that you're familiar with the different categories of data, that are different types of data, the different types of charts, and look at some examples of those, because I think those are some compelling examples that make the depiction very easy. It's very likely that I'll ask you, hey, this is going to be an example of a univariate analysis. What type of chart would we use for this? And you'd say, oh, that's going to be a histogram, Dr. Barnes, because I was paying very close attention in class. Or that, or I studied really well for the exam. One of the two, either one's fine. Okay. So with that, we're going to move on to our data visualization. Okay. So there are multiple different data visualization tools we can employ in this particular context. All right. And you probably heard of Tableau. I definitely know you've heard of Excel, and we've done some visualization in Excel. But one that's going to be readily available, and I think that's probably going to be the most common one used in the future, is Power BI. And the reason we say that is about 5 to 7 years ago, we were teaching students on how to use Tableau. And Tableau is really cool. Don't get me wrong. I really like Tableau. It is a proprietary program. And so you do have to buy a license for it to use it. It does have a free education license, and we were training students on it. We thought it was really neat. But then we started talking to employers outside of Truman State, and they were saying, yeah, we don't use Tableau. It's too expensive. They said, what do we use in place? Is Power BI becomes is part of the Microsoft Office suite. And we said, that makes a lot of sense. So that's why we started using Power BI and started doing training on that. So I want to introduce you to some of the things we're going to be doing in Power BI. Quick note, this is really important, by the way. You do have an assignment in Power BI for your homework on Wednesday. Please, and I'm going to be very forthright about this. Please make sure you read the instructions for this assignment. If you upload a Power BI file for your submission, you will not get credit for the assignment. Simply because the instructions say, make sure you do a screen capture of your Power BI results and put that into a document. Does everybody know how to do a screen capture in the room? Does anybody not know how to do a screen capture? Don't be afraid. I was much older than you when I first learned how to do a screen capture. So if you don't know how to do it, reach out to me. I can tell you how to do it, but you need to do a screen capture for that. The simple truth is, screen capture uses a far less data than uploading the entire Power BI file. So you will have to do something in Power BI, but you only are responsible for uploading a screen capture. But yeah, I want to make you aware of that. The good news is Power BI is available on all the computers in this room, all the computers on campus, and it's available via the remote desktop. So yeah, I'm going to jump away from here and I'm going to move on to the remote desktop so that we can actually move forward. So I'm going to pause. You can talk amongst yourselves. What is your favorite visualization? All right, I think we're ready to go now. So Real quick to note, if you have already opened Power BI, then you're ahead of the game. If you've not, there are some detail in the slides that help you out with this. It's going to look slightly different for you than it does for me because I'm operating on a remote desktop. That being said, from my I came in here on Saturday, so everybody else was at homecoming parade. I basically said I've seen the homecoming parade before, so I came in and it's in Power BI. I looked at the computers and it was pretty easy to follow through, even with the differences. I did provide some screen captures to hopefully help you out. So any differences should be minimal, which is actually very thankful because Power BI actually updates their program, or Microsoft updates Power BI every month. They provide new updates. So something that you might work on, 4 months earlier could look completely different 4 months later. So I was trying to make sure it was consistent, and I think we're in good shape. There's not a lot that we have to worry about. So to open Power BI, I want to do that. Open up Power BI, you want to go to the Start menu, click on All, and you'll scroll down to the letter P, and you're going to find Power BI Desktop and click on that. Now, if you don't have your licenses enabled for your Microsoft Word products, you may have to log in simply because it does require the dual factor authentication. But if you've already gone through that, great. If you haven't gone through that, it'll take you a second. The good news is we're going to walk through this pretty slow because it's pretty straightforward. So again, the very first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to identify some data that we need. So one of the neat things about Power BI is it works with different types of repositories of data. The most obvious and simple ones are going to be Excel workbooks. And the reason why is because we're looking at database formed data and we want to look at relational database analysis. Excel is very, very capable of putting that in there. So Access and Excel databases are both very, very helpful in that, but you can download it from other database programs. So you can see that it works on SQL Server. It also can operate on other data sources that are kind of open-ended. We're just going to do the simple one because this is the most straightforward. We're going to upload a Excel data file. So does everybody have that file from Brightspace that I specified earlier? Let's go to Excel workbook, click on that. And then we're going to have a lot of pop-ups that come up apparently. All right. So go ahead and find your file on your computer, wherever you've put it. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Mine is on my Y drive. It's called Data Analytics Demo Original. You're just going to double click on that and it's going to load it up. And it will take a second because it is a larger file. It's got about 5,000 records in it. But you should start seeing the navigator pop open here. So what this is telling us is that we've got this file here that has 3 tabs. And the way these tabs are set up is this is actually similar to a database system that we would see at a regular organization. These tabs are correlated, and we can actually combine the information together in the tabs, assuming that they have common parameters. So remember the primary key and foreign key operators that we talked about with relational databases earlier? If we can identify those in the databases, then the Power BI will do some additional analysis for us. Now, the good news is these are already set up. So what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to click on the check marks to each of these. Once you do, it will start loading example data. It's not the entire list of data, but should exactly show you what the format should look like. So we have customers, orders, and stores. Now, we could probably think about the way this is. This is actually there are a series of flower stores, just differences of flower stores. So we got a flower chain that's in different cities across the United States, okay? The stores are going to be common to orders and customers. So customers will order from a specific store, and whenever they place an order, that will come from a specific store. So we can actually say store ID is going to be a primary key over here in the stores file, but it's also probably going to be a foreign key in orders and customers. And we can actually check and see if that's the case. And see, we have store identifier in customers and store identifier in orders. Also, it's important to note that we have an additional relationship. You'll notice that in customers, we've got a primary ID and customer number, which is customer number. That customer number file is actually listed in the order number. So that's an additional foreign key. So our order file actually has 2 foreign keys, which means it can be matched to multiple databases. This is actually really good news for us because this means that we can do analysis between all 3 data sets because there's common keys between all of them. So that's going to make for some unique analysis. So let's go ahead and click on load make sure you have all 3 of these checked. If you have all 3 of these checked, go ahead and click on load. Gonna take a second there to load up. And this Windows keep bugging me, but it won't go away. I don't care about direct link mode. All right. So some interesting things should have happened here. If you look on the right now, you should have 3 data tables over here: customers, orders, and stores. So let's go ahead and just click on an arrow next to them. And you notice that the fields for each of those tables are listed below. And we can use this to pull certain fields into our data to do analysis. But we're going to wait to do that because there's some other things that we need to check first. So very first thing we want to look at, this is really, okay, I can move this. How about that? Okay. So you'll notice that we've got 4 tabs over here. 3 of these we are extremely interested in, okay? So we've got the report tab. This is where we're defaulting at. This is where we create our visualizations. We're going to come back to this at the end. Then we've got our table view, which is how the table would look if we looked at this in Excel or Access. We're going to take a look at that. We've also got our model view, which defines our relationships, which should look really familiar. We'll talk about that in a second. And then we've got something called the DAX query view, which is just the foundational language. You can click on that if you want to. We're not going to do any analysis in this because this is coding, and I'm not going to teach you how to code in Power BI, mostly because I don't know how to code in Power BI. But this, if you're going to actually put the code in here, you could do that from the DAX query view. Let's go ahead and click on model view. So we got some interesting stuff going on. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so I can show this off, because there's some things going on here that we want to talk about. So we've got 3 different tables listed here. These are the tables that kind of correlate to our data over here. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is that there appear to be lines between the tables. Have we seen anything like this before? This sure looks like UML diagrams, doesn't it? This actually, in fact, is very similar to UML diagrams. It's not kind of organized according to resource, events, and agent, but the tables are very similar to that. The tables are very similar to that in the fact that we can actually look at relationships. So there's a couple of things to note. First of all, if you highlight or just go put your cursor over a line, you will notice that two items highlight. So I put it over stores and customers. You'll notice the store identifier highlights. What is that telling us? That's our common key between the 2 tables. Remember I said that this is our primary key for stores and it looks like it's a foreign key in customers? Power BI recognized that relationship for us. We didn't have to specify that relationship. It actually should recognize it. Does everybody have that relationship, by the way? All 3 of these relationships should default. It's very good at identifying relationships when necessary. We can kind of see the relationships as well. And you'll notice that the arrows kind of point from where the primary key is going to where the primary key is headed. So it starts out here and it says, all right, store identifier comes from down here and moves over to this table. So this is the primary key. This is the foreign key. Same for this. Store identifier is the primary key, is the foreign key here. And if we look down here, highlight customer number is the primary key here, and it's the foreign key in the orders table. Also, you will notice that there's some numbers as well as some stars. What do those think you represent? We've talked about those before, but it's a little bit different in representation. Yeah, these are multiplicities. Specifically, these are the maximum multiplicities for each table. It doesn't list out all the multiplicities, it's just the maximum values for each one. So it's kind of interesting. It's a representation of a UML diagram that we've talked about before, but it's not as the same presentation as we looked at before, but should be somewhat familiar. It talks about all the fields that are present in each of the tables, so it's a bit of an expanded view. So yeah, that's what we see when we look at our model view. That actually provides the model for us as we would do in a traditional model for a UML diagram. Structure model is what I was looking for. This is basically a structure model view, as we talked about back in the previous chapters. All right, let's go over to table. So you'll notice here that we can look at all 3 of the tables. It will present this out as if we were looking at it in Excel. But that's not all we can do. Let's go ahead and click on the orders table. So what did I say? What have we talked about with data analysis? We've talked about the idea that the data is presented. But when we talk about Excel, one thing that I've tried to import to you is that you have to be very careful with doing analysis in Excel, and the fact that if you do analysis in Excel, you're changing the base data. So that's one thing that whenever people work in Excel, they always caution you to do. Say, whenever you have an Excel file, if it's the base data file and you're going to do the work in Excel, save that Excel file somewhere. make a copy of it, and then do your analysis in the copied file, because you do not want to ruin the integrity of the original data. The current analysis tools, modern analysis tools, get by that in the fact that they will save the original data, but you can still manipulate and add new data. So we can't change the existing data. We can't change it, but we can use additional operations to do new things. Let's go ahead and do an example of this. What I'd like to do is I want to create a new column. So let's go ahead and click on new column up here. And here's what I'd like you to put in. For this new column, I'd like you to type in test amount. Hopefully with not a capital M. There we go. All right. And we're going to type in quantity sold, which you will want to specify this is orders quantity sold. If you type in the letter Q, then this should come up and you can just click on orders quantity sold times sale price. So quantity sold times sale price. And you just hit enter and it will create this test amount field. So what is this field for? Well, logically speaking, sale amount should be a function of quantity sold and sales price, right? I know that's a profound statement. I think I learned that before college, Dr. Barnes. You're not really teaching me anything. It's like, that's fair. But we can check this sale amount to see that this it matches the test amount. We can actually compare those numbers because this is a computed amount, but we want to make sure that that's a true computation. So that's what the test amount is showing us. And it sure looks good for the ones that we're looking at right here. Obviously, we want to check them across, but this is okay for right now. We can also do some other information. So let's go ahead and just clean some stuff up because, again, we want to try to make this look clean. We're only going to do this for a few. So let's just change the format here to a currency symbol. And let's do this for sale price and sale amount too. So go to the column that you want to change and go to format and just change it over to whatever. Not letting you highlight the entire column. Does not give you the if you click somewhere in the column, it should be fine. It's just kind of one of those things. It's just kind of a formatting thing anyway. It's not really critical to what we're going to be doing. Just kind of show that you can actually do the analysis in the table. So yeah, this gives us some ways to manipulate the data, the underlying data, so we can add information and we can do analysis with other detail. Yes.
Like, I put it to currency and then like it just points to the dollar sign.
That's okay. It's not a big deal. It's not this is not a critical detail. It's just kind of a formatting issue. So we can manipulate the data to some degree, but if it doesn't change it, it's not going to be a big issue. It's not going to be a big deal. All right, let's go ahead and go to the report view. So this is where we create visualizations, and you will notice that there are a lot of visualization types over here. Now you can play around with these. We're only going to deal with 2 of these visualizations because, again, we're keeping this pretty basic. But let's just go ahead and talk about what it is that's appealing about the visualizations. So first of all, let's create a basic visualization to start, and then we'll see what are the ways that we can manipulate this visualization. So what I'd like to do is we're just going to start with the very basic one. We're going to do a stacked bar chart. So go ahead and click on that. And you'll notice that it's got the view of the stacked bar chart, but it doesn't really have anything in there because we haven't specified what we're going to be looking at. So the very first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and expand this out. Now, this is kind of cool. I'm going to expand it out to full view. I'm going to expand it out all the way to full view here. But if we wanted to, we could create multiple visualizations simultaneously. We could create up to like 4 visualizations simultaneously. And as we change variables, all the visualizations would update simultaneously. So this is kind of why we have those bars that pop up whenever we go to certain ranges. I could do like 2 views, like side to side. I could do just 1. I could do 4. I don't know if I could do more than 4. I'm sure it's possible. It's just probably not practical. Anyway, let's go ahead and do a very basic analysis. So we probably want to see something like, what do the orders look like from a store's perspective? So how much does each store have? Because remember, the stores are geographic. They're in different cities. So let's go ahead and put on our y-axis, let's put state. So go down to your stores data. Because remember, there are 3 tables and we want to select the stored or state from stores. And we put this in the y-axis over here. So you're just gonna, I guess I should probably explain. Put your cursor over it, click, drag. Drag it over to y-axis. Now, we don't have anything yet because we need to specify an x-axis. We have to kind of comparative analysis because that's what we're looking at here. For orders, let's click on orders. Let's go to sale amount and drag that to the x-axis. Now, I can't really overstate how profound what we just did is, because I know what you're just saying. It's like, Dr. Barnes, I could do this in Excel. And you're absolutely right, you can do this in Excel, but it'd be much harder to do. And the reason why is I just created a graph off of variables from 2 completely different tables in Excel. And it's adaptive. It can actually adapt as we change information. We'll see what that means here in just a second. This is a really, really powerful metric because not only does it operate between tables, but it also changes according to the variables that you specify. We'll see what that means here in just a second. So let's go ahead and clean this up a little bit and make this a little bit presentable. What we're going to do is we're going to do some very basic formatting stuff just to show you what formatting looks like. So you'll notice that this is a very, very kind of grimy table. It's got an explanation of everything that's up here. It's got some detail down here. I'm going to hide the filters for right now so we can actually see a little bit more. But let's go to the this thing called Format Your Visual. It looks like a little paintbrush. Click on that. And there's a few different items that we can edit. We're just going to do some very general edit. We're not going to focus on editing the axes too much. Let's click on the General tab. And let's do some basic edits, things that you would do in Excel, but we have to go through a little bit more of a routine to do this. So click on the down on title. And let's just change this to sale amount by state. And I'm going to make it bold. I'm also going to make the text a little bit larger. I'm going to make it to 20. I'm also going to put it with Calibri because I like Calibri. If you want to put it in Comic Sans, no judgment. Not in this class. In other classes, your instructors may say, don't use Comic Sans, okay? But if you want to do it here, all right, Ed. Actually, is Comic Sans even available on here? Oh, it is. How about that? That's all I got because I loved Comic Sans when I was in college, and they said, quit using that. It's not a professional thought. Let's go ahead and center this. So down in the title, go ahead and click on center alignment. So that's a pretty basic formatting. We're not going to do a lot of formatting, but that's a pretty basic formatting we want to do. We want to have a title at the top to kind of explain what the chart is. Make it look prominent, make it look good. There's a couple of different things we can go about that. We definitely can edit the axes. We can create subtitles. We can change the format of the data that we want, but that's all we're going to do for right now. Now, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but let's go ahead and do this right now before I forget. I'm not going to do it because I don't have any reason to, but I do want everybody in this room to do it. Let's save the file, okay? Because we've actually made some compelling edits here that we want to see, that we look for. So go ahead and go up to save file. Actually, I will save it because I want to be with you guys here. I'll be operating in the same place. So yeah, let's go ahead and I'm going to save it where I have my file saved. So I think I've actually got, yep. Actually, no, this is a completely different one. So yeah, class demo. I'm just going to save over my class demo file. It's a good habit to get and save. Again, this is probably one that if you have autosaves left on, it's probably not a problem, okay? Again, I say that's a bad idea in Excel because you might overwrite some data, but this one's probably not that big a deal if you want to have autosave set up. All right, let's go ahead and do one more thing. One more thing that I think is really cool. This is one of the things that I think is really cool about visualization. So if you were putting this in a PowerPoint, this is kind of where you default to, okay? You do want to default and take screen grabs and something like this. But let's say that you are in a modern setting. You're actually presenting to somebody, and they actually allow you to use Power BI as you're working through this. This is one of those cool opportunities you can actually show the power of something like this, the power of the tool. So the very first thing I want to do is we're going to go ahead and click out the filters again. Make sure we have the view of the filters. And let's go ahead and select flower name, click and just drag that and put filter on this page. Now, what this does is very similar to Excel. It adds a filter for this particular type, which means that we can select certain types that we want to add to our visualization, and the visualization will adapt to that data. This is very similar to the pivot charts that we were talking about a few weeks back, where we can filter between that detail. So let's say we want to see, what do the carnation sales look like by store? Instead of just saying, I want to look at all sales, I would want to look at carnations. So there's a bunch of different carnation types. Let's just go ahead and select them all. California does like their carnations. Of course, they're a big state, so we'd expect the sales to be higher. I do think there was something interesting I found one time when I was looking. I think on mixed carnations, Arizona has higher sales than California. So apparently, California only gets it when California only really likes carnations when they're one specific color. They're one specific color. If they're mixed, no, Arizona gets the mixed carnations. All right, so that's a good filter. And again, very simple filter, but very, very powerful because you can sort through analyses. If you're looking through categorical analysis, if you're in a presentation, you can drill down into information in detail just by using these filters. Let's do one other thing just for fun, just for context, okay? By the way, the reason I do this is because earlier versions of Power BI did not work on the remote desktop for this. I think that this one will work. I'm going to be very excited. I still get excited when it does work. So let's go ahead and click on our visual. So we're going to change our chart type, changes to filled map. Because remember, we talked about a map and a symbol map are best for geographic analysis. And these are by state. So presumably, we should be able to have a visualization by state. And there we go. As somebody who remembers what Excel was like and we only had bar charts before, I'm just kind of like, I get giddy when I see stuff like this. This is so cool. I've got all the power in my hands and I don't even know what I'm doing with it. So yeah, some pretty cool stuff that you can do with this. There's also different type of analysis that we can perform with this. You're going to explore different analysis. You're going to be doing a word cloud assignment for one of your activities for homework, which would be a little bit new, something that we haven't explored, talked about, but it'll walk you through step by step for that. But hopefully this is a good introduction of the types of things that we can do for in visualization. I encourage you that if you find this interesting to explore it some more, because this is something that you could leverage very heavily in your career and your occupation as a competitive advantage over others. If you know how to do good visualizations and good reporting, you're going to get a lot more traction in your career than you would otherwise. And so there's different skill sets that I encourage everybody to adapt to. If this one's personally interesting to you, then you should definitely pursue it in much greater detail. I'm not going to be the best instructor in teaching that because I've basically shown you the extent of my Power BI knowledge today, but I do think that there's a lot more to explore here. All right, be sure to save your file and then we're good for today. So have a great day.